Hi, I'm Posie Strenz, Creative Projects Coordinator at the Emerson Resort and Spa. Each year in November, we have a community week full of events for our community. This year, 2020, we couldn't invite large groups in, but we have found some alternative ways to have a meaningful community week all the same. One is a video biking tour of the Ashokan Rail Trail with as tour guides Chris White, Ulster County Deputy Director of Planning, Kevin D. Smith, Chairman of the Woodstock Land Conservancy, and me, Posie Strenz. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Welcome to the Catskills and welcome to Ulster County. My name is Chris White and I'm Deputy Director of Planning for Ulster County. I was also the project manager for the construction of the Ashokan Rail Trail, which opened in 2019. I welcome you to this rail trail. I'm so glad to finally open it after these years of planning and construction and share with you the views and the experience that I've had going out there over these years. It's so great to see it now being used by people of all ages and all abilities, seeing these views that I got to see but had to really bushwhack through some pretty rough areas to get to. The Ashokan Rail Trail is open from sunrise to sunset every day of the year for all non-motorized uses, which include hiking, biking, running, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, fat biking, nature observation. The only motorized vehicles that are allowed on the trail are for persons with disabilities who have a wheelchair or a motorized scooter. The trail is 11 and a half miles long, and we have a trailhead at each end in the east and west, and one located in the middle. So starting from the east to west, there's Woodstock Dyke Trailhead, which is in West Hurley. The second trailhead is located about 6 miles west of there in Ashokan, and the final trailhead is about 5.5 miles from there, right off of Route 28A in Boyceville. All three of these trailheads have one of the major elements of the trail within a short walking distance. So at West Hurley, within half a mile, you have a scenic overlook on the Glenford Dyke. At Ashokan, within a quarter mile, you have a beautiful boardwalk that spans a wetland. And then at Boyceville Bridge Trailhead, you have the Boyceville Bridge within a few hundred yards of the trailhead. The Ashokan Rail Trail had been thought about for some decades in planning documents. It really started in earnest in late 2012 when the former county executive Michael Hine announced an historic agreement with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection to allow the county to convert its former railroad corridor along the northern shore of Ashokan Reservoir into a non-motorized recreational path. When the reservoir was constructed in the early 1900s, the railroad was actually moved to this northern shore. It had previously been along the Esopus Creek Valley, which was later inundated with water to create Ashokan Reservoir. So it has some of the nicest views of the Ashokan Reservoir and the western Catskill Peaks, which really hadn't been available to the public without a permit for the last century. The way that the Ashokan Rail Trail differs from many of the other trails in the Catskill Peaks is that it's relatively flat. It's maybe 1% to 2% grade at most in its steepest area. So we had an opportunity here to really expand hiking, biking opportunities for persons with disabilities, people with limited mobility, young people, the elderly, and we had to balance having an accessible trail with also having an environmentally friendly trail. The Ashokan Rail Trail is probably the most or one of the most sustainably constructed rail trails in the Northeast. What we came up with was a proprietary composition of crushed stone with clay that not only allowed this trail to be pervious for water, which was important to protect the reservoir water quality, but it also gave us a stable and firm surface that is ADA compliant and wide enough and accessible enough that anyone of any ability can use it. Wheelchairs have been out there. We've seen specially adapted bicycles. In designing the trail, we tried to minimize the future maintenance of the trail, and we did that by making sure that we had, again, this crushed stone surface that's easily replaceable. It's not like pavement. We minimized the amount of fence that we would need. We took down more than 2,700 dead ash trees, which would have fallen on various elements of the trail. We restored all of the drainage so that there's very little erosion from these heavy storms that we've gotten. In 2 areas, we had areas of the rail bed that had evolved into wetlands because the drainage systems hadn't been maintained for 4 or 5 decades. So in one instance, we did a detour around the original rail bed and let that remain as a wetland and deviated around it. In another, we didn't have that option, so we built a 520-foot long boardwalk spanning over the wetland. The other thing that we did is we daylighted one of the creeks that feeds into Ashokan Reservoir, the Butternut Creek. Daylighting is a process where you take a stream or a creek or some body of water that had been routed through some type of man-made structure and you open it up. There had been a large concrete-bottomed culvert that had been there for the last 100 years, and it collapsed in the late 80s. And we removed all of that culvert and put a bridge there instead, opening up the creek to what it had been historically, to allow better fish passage up and down the stream, and also just to open it up for other wildlife and for better drainage. We as a county went through a difficult process of decision-making, of fact-finding, and then of implementing this project. And there were very strong opinions on both sides. And what has made me really proud is to see the people now using the trail every day. I can go up there on a weekday when it's not even the nicest weather and the parking lots are near full. And then getting the feedback of people saying, I never knew this was here. I've lived in the Catskills for decades. I never had seen these vistas. We made an area that previously was inaccessible, and it was really a wall between Route 28 and the Ashokan, and we turned it into a window so you can actually look through and see all of these areas that were previously blocked off. I think trails have this potential to improve public health, to improve our communities, and just to make it a lot nicer to live around here. And I'm seeing that play out already in the smiles of the people on the trail and the feedback that we're getting. While we often accentuate how much a trail might benefit us in terms of additional sales tax or businesses or tourism, one of the biggest things is people are going to tend to want to be outside more. They're going to want to take their kids outside and be more active, be more healthy, connect with our environment. That's a great thing right now with so many digital temptations to keep people inside. So welcome. Come outside with us.
Spanning the northern rim of the Ashokan Reservoir, the Ashokan Rail Trail runs through and over a variety of environs, from open views across the 8,315-acre reservoir at the Glenford Dyke to quiet forest glades, rocky cliffs, deep forest valleys, rush-filled wetlands, protected ponds, and rushing mountain streams. With all of this variety of habitat, visitors are afforded an opportunity to encounter a wide variety of birds and other wildlife. With 3 trailheads, the Ashokan Rail Trail is accessible from the Woodstock Dyke Trailhead at the 10.5-mile mark, the Ashokan Station Trailhead in Shokan at the 16-mile mark, and just 3.5 miles from the Emerson Resort and Spa, the Boyceville Bridge Trailhead at the 21.5-mile mark. Our bike tour flows with the Boyceville Bridge Trailhead as starting point. Along the way, you may catch sight of markers placed every half mile. Each mile marker has the letter K and then a number. That K stands for Kingston, not kilometers. Back when the railroad ran along this path, it began in Kingston. The station at the Rondout Creek was mile marker 0. From K21 through K19, you will be treated to expansive views of the Ashokan to the south and several small and placid bays to the north. Between the Esopus Creek, the open reservoir, and protected bays, there are plenty of opportunities to catch sight of water birds and shorebirds. Though you might be more likely to spot a bald eagle over the central promenade of the Ashokan Reservoir, at the Boyceville Bridge over the Esopus, you may spot a red-tailed hawk or a falcon. And people fly fishing in the Esopus. The source of the Esopus Creek is Lake Winnisook at the base of Slide Mountain, the tallest peak in the Catskills. Esopus is the word for high banks in the Lenni-Lenape language. The Lenni-Lenape are the Native Americans who originally lived along its high banks. Now, for over 100 years, the waters of the Esopus have flowed into the Ashokan Reservoir, daily providing drinking water for over 9 million New York City residents. The shoreline of the Ashokan Reservoir is a constantly fluctuating boundary zone, changing with the seasons, weather, drought or damp, and the requirements of New York City for more or less water. During the typically drier months of July, August, and September, the muddy shores may extend for hundreds of feet in places. The spring months, after snow melt in the mountains, can bring the water lapping up to the very edges of the trees and shrubs. Within the first few miles along the bays to the left and right of us on the western end of the rail trail, keep an eye out for great blue herons, belted kingfishers, common mergansers, buffleheads, and the rarer hooded merganser. On the muddy shores between K21 to K10, one may see sandpipers, the solitary sandpiper, killdeer, and barn swallows. At mile marker K18.5, we cross the Butternut Bridge, spanning a valley where the original hamlet of Shokan once stood. The Butternut Creek now runs under this bridge, its restored riffles providing a wonderful habitat for trout and other aquatic organisms as well as insects. This cool valley with its older trees makes a wonderful habitat for swallows and other birds who like to nest in tree hollows and catch insects on the wing. Traveling along the trail both east and west of the Ashokan Wetlands, you will go through swaths of woodland, including Appalachian oak pine forest, deciduous wetland, evergreen northern hardwood, evergreen plantation, oak and sugar maple forests. Keep on the lookout for red-bellied woodpeckers, white-breasted nuthatches, hermit thrushes, ovenbirds, yellow warblers, and if you're really lucky, scarlet tanagers. Here, about half-mile west of the Ashokan trailhead, we come upon a restored wetlands area with a boardwalk spanning its banks. The replacement of the old train bed with the boardwalk has allowed the wetlands to once again freely meander north of the reservoir, and also affords visitors an opportunity to get a good look at the buzzing natural life among the reeds, bittersweet, and sumac. Birds you may see in the wetlands include the red-winged blackbird and the common yellowthroat. In between the wetlands, open water, and woodlands, we come across patches of brushy forest edges, bushy fields, and areas of disturbed open land. Some field birds will make these spots their home, while others will seek them out as they migrate to other places. Land which is transitioning from farm field to forest, or in our case, spaces that have transitioned from woodland to paths and parking lots, provide grass and bugs that support these field birds. Some birds you may see in the fields, parking lot areas, and brushy, bushy areas by tree lines include the field sparrow, white-throated sparrow, and the indigo bunting. As we approach the wide open expanse of the water at the Glenford Dyke, on each side of the trail are cut-out rock cliffs, likely blasted with what at the time was newly invented dynamite. The jagged remains of exposed bedrock now provide a moist and mossy habitat for insects and birds alike. These rock cuts along the rail trail are reminders of how much work went into building a railroad westward into the Catskill Mountains back in the 1860s and 70s. In these rock cuts, you may spot dark-eyed juncos hunting for insects on the wing, flying from the wooded areas to open sections above the trail along the reservoir.
Hi, my name is Kevin Smith. I'm the chairman of the Woodstock Land Conservancy, which is a community land trust in Woodstock, New York. Planning for the trail moved forward, and the trail actually got final approvals after the 33rd approval by the Ulster County Legislature to do with this trail. And the trail was moving into construction. We started really turning our efforts with Ulster County and with New York DEP, the Water Authority, and with the New York-New Jersey Trail Conference to really start to look at how was the trail going to be managed once it was open. And through a grant with New York State DEC, we created a landmark volunteer stewards program, the Ashokan Stewards program. And we have a core of really dedicated volunteers. So the Stewards program has been a really wonderful way of having people out here that can be eyes and ears for the county and New York City about what's happening out here, but also they can engage visitors and really help them to gain an appreciation for this place, for the Catskills, for drinking water supply, and it's just been a pretty marvelous project for us to be involved in.
After riding 11.5 miles west to east, we're turning around at the Woodstock trailhead, where we catch a glimpse of the Woodstock Dyke and some remnants of railroad track.
There are multiple places along this particular trail that have this intrinsic kind of serendipitous aesthetic quality that looks like it was designed to be a trail. And one of them is the Glenford Dyke. At the Glenford Dyke, there is a stone wall, a bluestone wall that's got curved capstones that was built by masons at the time that the railroad was moved up out of what was at that time the bottom of the Esopus River Valley. And the rail corridor got shifted up to what became the north shore of the reservoir. And this beautiful bluestone wall lines one side of the Glenford Dike, where the railroad ran right up on top of the dike. And now people that walk there get to enjoy this incredibly unique aesthetic of this very long, straight promenade, essentially, with the bluestone wall, and the trail is very wide there, and it's almost like a boulevard. And because it's so close to the Woodstock Dyke trailhead in West Hurley at the eastern end of the Ashokan Rail Trail, people come out, they get out of their cars, and they take their walks, and they walk through this beautiful section of woods, and then it opens up onto the dike with the bluestone wall. And for the first time, you start to see the views of the reservoir. You see the views of the mountains, of the real Catskills in the distance, which of course, if you ride your bicycle on the trail west to Ashokan Station and then to Boyceville, you end up right next to those mountains up at the top end of the reservoir and at the Boyceville end of the rail trail. We're at Ashokan Station. The original name of Ashokan was Ashokan. And Ashokan Station is the central trailhead and parking area for the Ashokan Rail Trail. So this is the bridge over one of the two wetlands that were delineated along the Ashokan Rail Trail corridor, the old U&D Railroad corridor. And when the trail was going through planning and the wetland was delineated, it was determined that it was of such a size that they couldn't leave the trail on the old rail bed, and needed to figure out a way to run the trail through the wetland without disturbing it. And so the boardwalk was designed to float above the wetland and allow for the habitat continuity underneath it. And serendipitously, as many things with this trail, it provides this great viewing area so that when people come through here, and this day is a perfect example of that, you can stop and listen. If you come early in the morning or in the evening, the wildlife here, the bird life here is really wonderful, and it's just a great place. I see people sitting here quite often when I'm out on my Steward rides. So we're standing here in the overpass. Reservoir Road is right above us here. It travels from Winchell's Corners and then goes over the Dividing Weir Bridge to the south shore of the reservoir. And on that side of the reservoir, New York City DEP has its own very significant walking trail and bike path called the Promenade that is a fairly long trail now. One section of it on the old, what locals call the lemon squeeze, a very narrow section that was built when the reservoir was originally constructed, used to be open to cars, but after 9/11, DEP determined that it wasn't safe for that to be open to vehicle traffic in that way. So that has become a connected part of the promenade now, and it's a very, very popular walking and biking trail, including there is a bald eagle roost that is a huge magnet for bird photographers. One thing that's really great connected to the Ashokan Rail Trail is that as part of the landmark agreement between Ulster County and New York City DEP to build the Ashokan Rail Trail on the old U&D right-of-way. DEP made an additional commitment. They are, as part of their centennial capital projects, to upgrade and repair all of the dikes around the reservoir, which are now 100 years old. They will be replacing the dividing weir bridge over the middle of the reservoir that separates the upper basin and the lower basin of the reservoir. And when they do that, they will be putting in a dedicated pedestrian and bicycle facility that will connect from this side in the Ashokan Rail Trail to the south side of the reservoir and the promenade and Route 28A, which is on the south side of the reservoir. So that will make for a premier new connection, connecting these two trails and extending these pedestrian bicycle friendly facilities much further around the reservoir. This interpretive panel is about the mountains. It's got a great silhouette of the mountains that you see from this particular vantage point with their names, and it talks a little bit about them. It also talks about the great painting and art tradition of the Hudson River School and some of those painters and the work that they did here. And one of my personally favorite aspects of it is that one of our esteemed painters in the region and an instructor at the Woodstock School of Art, Kate McLaughlin, had actually done a painting that was painted from almost exactly the same perspective as Asher Duran's famous High Point Shandaken Mountains painting that he painted in 1853. So on this panel, what you see is the Asher Duran painting on the top right-hand side, and directly below it, Kate McLaughlin's Samuel's Point painting that she did in 2016. Kate McLaughlin, who's a resident of Olive Bridge, and in addition to being an instructor at the Woodstock School of Art and a well-known local painter, Kate is a 13th generation resident of Olive Bridge. She states that her grandmother always used to tell people that she was born under the water, meaning that their farm was one of the many buildings and properties that were in the Esopus Valley as part of a number of communities that were displaced and to make way for the construction of the Ashokan Reservoir. And so there's always a poignancy here in terms of coming and looking out and enjoying the beauty, but also recognizing the layers and layers of history here. And some of that history involves loss. Just as even prior to the settlers, these were native lands. One of the questions we get asked the most out here is the trail going to be extended? Especially, is the trail going to be extended to Kingston, where it would connect with the Kingston Green Line, which is this great new system of connected bike trails and rail trails and bike lanes, and to Ulster County's other trails, the O&W Rail Trail out the 209 corridor, and the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail on the Route 32 corridor. And we hope that it will. It's just 5 miles away, and we hope that ultimately that the Empire State Trail, where it travels up into Ulster County and crosses into Ulster County over the walkway over the Hudson and makes its way up to Kingston, that they will extend that the few short miles up to Woodstock Dyke here at milepost 10.0 and right into the heart of the Catskill Park. It's incredibly gratifying to see how much people are enjoying the trail, and no time was this driven home more than during the pandemic and during the heart of the shutdown this past spring. This became one of the only refuges that people had to be outside. we were able to keep this trail open, and a small group of volunteer stewards continued to come out here. And I can't tell you how many times I had people say to me, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have this trail to come to. So we're standing here at the entrance to the trail from the Boyceville trailhead, which is off Route 28A, just on the edge of Boyceville. And this trailhead, of the three major trailheads and parking areas, this one is actually a temporary trailhead. In the next few years, New York City DEP is going to replace the Five Arches Bridge, which is the big highway bridge going over the Esopus Creek, just up there. And when they do that, they're going to need to have additional space for construction equipment and staging. So at that point, this trailhead will get reworked however it gets to be reworked in order to allow for trail use as well as for the construction project that's going on. But one of the really cool aspects of this project that, similar to DEP's commitment to build a pedestrian bike lane across the dividing weir bridge on Reservoir Road connecting the north and the south sides of the reservoir, when they build the new bridge over the Esopus Creek, the trail, instead of ending at the gate about 50 yards up there, will pass under 28A, and then it will loop up onto the shoulder of 28A, and there will be a pedestrian bike lane on that far side of Route 28 right up to the route intersection with Route 28. And that's great because that will connect Boyceville, the hamlet of Boyceville, right into the trail, and literally Ontior School, Bennett School are a stone's throw from this trailhead, and that's going to make it much easier for people from the school, for classes, for sports activities, to be able to access the trail from the school.